Most people use silicone to seal gaps and protect surfaces, but when you combine it the right way with a small amount of WD-40, it can turn into a surprisingly useful repair solution for all kinds of problems around your home and workshop. Welcome back to Dan Fix. Hi, I'm Dan. Today we're going to test this unusual mixture on several completely different materials and see what actually happens once it dries. And honestly, some of these results surprised me more than I expected. Here I have two simple plastic cups. Into both cups, I add a moderate amount of silicone sealant. Not too much. The first cup gets a small amount of WD-40. Now for the second cup, I'm adding acetone. Acetone behaves very differently from WD-40. And for the first cup, I'm also adding a little red oil-based paint. Not because the color changes the strength, but because visual contrast makes it easier to see how evenly the coating spreads across surfaces later. Now we need a proper mixing tool. And instead of using an expensive attachment, we're going to make one ourselves using 3 simple zip ties. The zip ties get connected together into a circular shape. Then a wooden chopstick slides directly through the center opening. Now the ties are tightened firmly around the stick while the extra plastic ends get trimmed away carefully. At first, it still looks extremely simple, but once attached to the cordless driver, the entire setup suddenly becomes surprisingly effective. And there it is, a homemade mixing tool built in just a few minutes. The principle is actually very similar to the expensive mixing tools used in kitchens for cake batter or cream mixing. As the motor spins at high speed, the flexible zip ties begin whipping through the silicone mixture, forcing the materials to blend much faster and more evenly than stirring by hand. And now it's finally time to test it. Let's begin with something simple: cardboard. I divide the cardboard into 2 equal sections using masking tape so we can compare the untreated surface with the coated side later. Now the acetone and silicone mixture gets brushed slowly across one half. Long, smooth strokes, making sure the liquid spreads evenly into the fibers. And this is where cardboard becomes interesting. Cardboard absorbs moisture extremely easily because of its layered paper structure. Once water gets inside the material, weakens, swells, and slowly loses strength. That's why old cardboard boxes stored in humid places usually become soft and fragile over time. But now we let this coated section dry completely and move to the next material: wood. This test is much more practical because wood constantly suffers from moisture damage in real life. Rain, humidity, sunlight, temperature changes. Over time, wood absorbs moisture through tiny pores and begins expanding, cracking, or slowly rotting from the inside. Now let's move to something much more interesting: fiber cement roofing sheets. These materials are extremely common in workshops, storage buildings, garages, and outdoor structures because they're affordable and durable. But after years under heavy sunlight and rain, problems slowly begin appearing. The surface becomes weaker. Tiny cracks form. Water starts penetrating deeper during storms. And once moisture repeatedly enters those weak areas, the damage gradually spreads larger over time. That's usually when people start thinking about expensive waterproof coatings or replacing the roofing entirely. So now we apply the acetone and silicone mixture directly onto the surface. The brush slowly moves across the cement sheet while the liquid begins soaking into the rough texture. And this is exactly where thinner mixtures become useful, because fiber cement contains tiny pores everywhere. Thicker coatings sometimes struggle to penetrate deeply enough. Tires. Almost every home has something made from rubber. Car tires, motorcycle tires, rubber seals, outdoor tools. And rubber constantly suffers from UV exposure, heat rain, and oxidation. Over time, the surface dries out, loses flexibility, and tiny cracks begin forming. Now the coating gets brushed carefully onto the tire surface. Slow circular motions around the rubber texture. At first, the treated section immediately looks darker and slightly refreshed. And honestly, this is one of the most practical tests in the entire project because rubber deterioration is something almost everyone eventually deals with. Now we move to the wall test. This is where things become much more serious. Exterior walls constantly exposed to rain and moisture often develop dark stains, peeling paint mold growth and internal dampness. And once moisture starts penetrating deeply into walls, the repair costs become expensive very quickly. That's exactly why waterproof paints are often so expensive, because preventing water intrusion is much easier than repairing structural moisture damage later. So now we wait for everything to dry completely. And finally, it's time for the results. Let's start with the fiber cement sheet. Now I slowly pour water across both sections, and immediately the difference becomes obvious. Look closely at the untreated side. Water spreads out and begins soaking into the surface almost immediately. But on the coated side, the water behaves completely differently. Instead of soaking in the droplets, stay on the surface and begin sliding away. And honestly, that behavior matters much more than people realize. Because water sitting inside porous materials year after year is exactly what slowly destroys them. Now let's test the wood. Again, the untreated side absorbs moisture quickly, while the protected section resists penetration much more effectively. That protective layer can help reduce moisture damage, swelling, and long-term deterioration on many wooden surfaces around your home or workshop. Now, back to the cardboard. The untreated side already feels softer and weaker after exposure to water, but the coated side holds together much better. And now let's focus on the two most practical applications, the wall and the tire. These are probably the most useful parts of the entire experiment. For walls, the biggest enemy is repeated moisture exposure. Rainwater slowly enters tiny cracks. Paint begins peeling, mold develops, and over time, the wall weakens from the inside. If you enjoyed this experiment, don't forget to like and subscribe because there are still many more useful DIY projects and repair ideas coming soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.